I was sitting at the dinner table thinking it was just another quiet Sunday evening with my family, but within moments, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family was shattered. This isn't just my story, it's a story for anyone who has ever given too much, waited too long, and kept hoping that one day their sacrifices would finally be seen. We grow up being told that family is everything, that no matter what happens, you stick together, you help, you give, you stay. And I believed that with every fiber of my being. So I gave. I gave my time, my energy, my money. I gave until there was nothing left of me. Until one day, sitting across from my parents and my two younger brothers, I realized something that broke my heart and set me free all at once. They didn't see me as family. Not really. Not unless I was paying for something. This story is for anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own home. Anyone who has been told they're selfish for finally saying no. Because sometimes walking away isn't cruel. It's necessary. And it's the first step toward finally choosing yourself. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread, the kind of scent that used to make me feel safe when I was little. I sat on the white wooden chair I'd sat in 100 times before, facing my parents, James and Karen Pierce, and my two younger brothers, Ryan and Jake. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. There was a strange tension in the air, the kind you can't see but feel deep in your gut. Karen folded her napkin slowly, then looked up at me with a forced smile. "We wanted to tell you something important, Lauren," she said. James cleared his throat. "We finalized our will?" I nodded, expecting a normal conversation about planning, responsibility, maybe even a few questions about how I could help guide my brothers. But then Ryan leaned back, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. To put it simply, he said, "You're not getting anything." I stared at him, waiting for the joke to end. It didn't. Jake added, in a light tone, like he was talking about the weather, "They're leaving the house, the beach property, and everything else to us." My heart dropped. I looked to my parents for confirmation. Karen gave a tiny nod. "We think this is what's best. You have a good career, a stable income, but the boys, they're still finding their way. They need the help more than you do." I couldn't speak at first. I just stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. After everything I had done, this was their decision. I had helped pay their mortgage when Dad lost his job. I'd sent money every time Jake switched majors and ran out of tuition funds. I had given Ryan enough to cover his credit card debt more times than I could count. And now, I was the one left out. "So after everything I've done for this family, you've decided I deserve nothing?" I finally asked, my voice shaky. Karen sighed, her tone suddenly disappointed. "Lauren, you always make things about money." I clenched my fists under the table. "It's not about money," I said quietly. "It's about how I've shown up for you all, time and time again. It's about respect." Ryan laughed. "No one asked you to help, you just liked playing the hero." Jake smirked. "Or maybe you thought that if you gave us enough, Mom and Dad would finally love you like they love us." Their words stung more than I could express. I waited, begged in silence, for my parents to stop them. But they didn't. They sat there, silent. That's when I knew I wasn't part of this family the way I had always hoped. I was just useful. I stood up from the table, heart pounding. "If that's your decision," I said, voice calm, "then here's mine. Don't expect anything from me again." And I walked out. No one followed me. No one stopped me. That was the moment everything changed. That night, I drove home in silence. No music, no news. Just the sound of the road beneath my tires and the echo of their words replaying in my head. "You always make things about money. No one asked you to help. You thought they'd love you if you paid enough." I walked into my apartment, dropped my keys on the counter, and sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Slowly, I opened my banking app, something I used to check constantly to make sure everyone was taken care of. The numbers glared back at me. $1,900. That was what I had been sending every single month to help my parents cover their mortgage and expenses. Another $1,200 split between Ryan and Jake, depending on who was in more trouble that month. I had skipped vacations, said no to new furniture, worked overtime for years, all because I believed helping them meant love. That one day they'd say, "Thank you, Lauren. We see you. We appreciate you." But that day never came. Instead, I got a seat at a dinner table where my worth was weighed, measured, and found unnecessary. I thought back to the time Jake called me in tears saying he was about to drop out of school. I wired him tuition money that same night. Or the time Ryan begged me for help after he got scammed trying to grow his personal brand. I bailed him out, no questions asked. I didn't do it for recognition. But I hoped, it meant something. It didn't. All they saw was someone who would always say yes. I had become the backup plan, the emergency fund, the one who could be counted on not because they cared about me, but because they knew I wouldn't let them fall. And maybe that was my mistake. I kept showing up, thinking love was something you could earn if you just gave enough. That night, I realized something for the first time. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough because they never really wanted me. They just wanted what I could offer. And for the first time in my life, I began to wonder, what would happen if I stopped? The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold and my phone resting in my hand. My thumb hovered over the recurring transfers tab. It should have been an easy decision, but it wasn't. For years, sending those payments felt like my responsibility, like a quiet promise I had made to always keep the family afloat, no matter how tired I was. But things were different now. They had made their choice. They didn't need me. They said so themselves. And so, with a deep breath and a racing heart, I pressed cancel. A confirmation popped up. All automatic payments have been successfully stopped. I stared at the screen. Then I set the phone down and leaned back, letting out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. There was anger, there was sadness, but more than anything, there was relief. The weight I had carried for so long, it was finally off my shoulders. I didn't expect the fallout to come so quickly. That same afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Lauren," she snapped, "did you cancel this month's payment?" I closed my eyes. "Yes, I did." She paused. I could hear her trying to control her tone, but disappointment bled through every word. "You know we rely on that money. The mortgage, the bills. How do you expect us to manage now?" I kept my voice steady. "Mom, you said I was doing fine on my own, that I didn't need help. So I figured it was time you leaned on Ryan and Jake for once." She scoffed. "That's not fair. You're being dramatic. This isn't about money." I almost laughed. "Isn't it? Because the only time you call me is when money's involved." She sighed, her voice tight. "I just don't understand. What's gotten into you?" "I'm done being the only one who gives," I said. "I've helped. I've sacrificed. But now, I'm choosing to help myself." There was a long silence. Then, quietly but coldly, she said, "I don't even recognize you anymore." I swallowed hard. Maybe that's because you never really saw me in the first place. I hung up. No tears, no second guessing. That was the day I stopped being their safety net and started being my own. The silence didn't last long. Within hours, the messages started. "Ryan. What the hell are you doing? Mom's freaking out. Jake. Cutting us off? Seriously, who does that to their own family?" I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in explaining myself to people who never cared to listen when I was breaking under the weight of helping them. But a few days later, things took a darker turn. I came home late from work one night. The hallway was dim, quiet, but something felt off. When I reached my apartment door, I froze. The entire frame was sealed shut with hardened industrial foam, stuff construction workers use to keep water and air out. It was packed into every crevice, around the knob, the hinges, everywhere. Whoever did it wanted me locked out. My chest tightened. I reached for my phone and pulled up the hallway's security camera feed. Fast forward, pause, rewind. There he was. Jake. Hoodie on, baseball cap low, but I knew that posture anywhere. He smirked at the camera as he sprayed the foam like he was proud of himself. My hands shook with rage. I didn't hesitate. I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the footage. One of the officers looked at me and asked, "Do you want to press charges?" I stared at the screen, Jake's face frozen mid-action. My own brother had vandalized my home because I dared to stop being his personal bank. I nodded. Yes, I want him held accountable. The next morning, the phone rang. It was my father. "Lauren," he said, his voice clipped. "Did you really call the cops on your own brother?" "I did. You had no right to do that. He was just angry. We're family." "He vandalized my property, Dad." Silence. Then, "How much to make this go away?" I didn't flinch. $3,000. That covers the damage and my time. He exploded. "How can you extort your own brother?" "It's not extortion," I said calmly. "It's consequences." By noon, the money was in my account, sent from Dad's email, no message, just a cold transaction. But later that day, another message did come from Mom A Facebook post. It was long, dramatic, and completely false. She wrote about how I had abandoned the family, how she and Dad were struggling to survive, and how their ungrateful daughter turned her back on them in their time of need. I watched as comments flooded in. "So sorry you're going through this. Some children forget where they came from. You don't deserve this kind of betrayal." Not one person knew the truth, that I had paid their mortgage, that I had covered my brother's tuition and car payments, that one of them had vandalized my home. They weren't just angry anymore. They were rewriting the story and painting me as the villain. But I had a voice too, and for the first time in my life, I intended to use it. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, reading the comments beneath my mother's post. People who barely knew me were calling me heartless, ungrateful, cold. They didn't know the late nights I worked just to keep the lights on in my parents' house. They didn't know the vacations I canceled, the savings I drained, or the emotional weight I carried for a family that never once said thank you. I could have stayed quiet, let them have their story, but why should I? If they wanted to take this public, then so would I. I opened my social media app and hit new post. And I told the truth. I wrote about the thousands of dollars I had sent my parents every month for nearly a decade. I listed how many tuition payments, how many car repairs, how many late-night bailouts I had funded. I wrote about how Jake vandalized my apartment and how I had to involve the police because I no longer felt safe. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't even ask for understanding. I just wanted the truth out there. And then I hit post. Within hours, the reaction was explosive. Some family members messaged me privately, shocked, apologetic. One aunt said she had no idea I'd been the one supporting everyone for years. Others stayed silent. But the biggest reaction came from my immediate family. Mom called, furious. "What did you just do, Lauren? You humiliated us." "No," I replied calmly. "I told the truth. You're just embarrassed people finally know it." She shouted about how I was tearing the family apart, that Dad couldn't show his face in church, that Ryan and Jake were devastated. I asked her, "Did any of you feel that way when I was paying all your bills? When I was crying alone at night, wondering why nothing I did was ever enough?" Silence. Then, coldly, she said, "If you do this, don't expect to come back. We are no longer your family." I didn't flinch because deep down I knew they never really were, not in the way that mattered. And now I had finally set myself free. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was absolute. No more angry calls, no more guilt-tripping texts, no more backhanded comments pretending to be concerned. At first, the quiet felt unnatural, like I was waiting for the next blow to come, but slowly that stillness began to feel like peace. I focused on work, threw myself into a major project and completed it ahead of schedule. A month later, I got a promotion. The day I moved into my new office, I stood by the window, watching the city move beneath me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel proud without guilt. I didn't owe that success to anyone else, it was mine. And then I did something I'd been putting off for years. I booked a trip to Italy. It had always been a dream, one I buried beneath family obligations and bank transfers. But now, nothing held me back. Florence was more beautiful than I imagined. The cobblestone streets, the warm espresso, the golden light over terracotta rooftops, everything felt alive. One afternoon, I was sitting at a quiet cafe near the Piazza della Signoria, sipping cappuccino, when a voice broke through the hum of conversation. "You seem like someone who's falling in love with this city," I looked up. He was tall, with kind eyes and a calm, steady smile. His name was Alex, from New York, worked in interior design, a traveler who had also come here to breathe. We talked for hours. Not once did he ask about my past. Not once did I feel the pressure to explain myself. With him, I wasn't someone's sister or daughter or provider. I was just me. We explored Florence together, markets, museums, sunset walks along the Arno River. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, not for what I could give, but for who I was. One night, sitting on a rooftop terrace overlooking the glowing city, I looked at the stars and smiled. I used to think happiness came from being needed, but real happiness, it comes from being free, and I had finally chosen to be free. Coming back home, everything looked the same, but I wasn't. I was no longer the daughter who gave everything and asked for nothing. I was no longer the sister who paid the bills, hoping for love in return. I was no longer the quiet provider, waiting for someone to see her. I was Lauren Pierce, and I had finally stepped into my own life. The holidays came and went. I didn't hear from my family, not even a card. But I wasn't alone. I hosted a small Christmas dinner in my apartment. Friends filled the room with laughter. My Aunt Rachel, the only one who had ever truly supported me, brought cookies and a warm hug. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of missing something. I felt full. I used to believe that family meant sacrifice, that love meant obligation. But now I know family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by love, respect, and presence. If you're someone who's always giving, hoping it'll be enough, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped? And maybe, like me, you'll find that walking away isn't the end. It's the beginning. Your beginning. Like, share, comment below. Your story matters.
Emily Turner had spent 20 years with her husband, Robert. They had what many would call the perfect life. A beautiful home, 2 children, and a marriage that seemed unshakable. Robert was a successful lawyer, and Emily, a dedicated wife, kept their home running smoothly while supporting his career. They had an image of perfection, always attending social events, maintaining their ideal family dynamic, and going on vacations. But things began to shift. Robert's work hours grew longer, he came home late more often, and when he did, he seemed distant. Emily chalked it up to the stress of his work. After all, Robert had just been promoted to senior partner at his law firm. Surely this new role was demanding, and he needed more time to focus on his career. However, it wasn't just the long hours that started to change the atmosphere at home. The intimate moments they once shared seemed to fade. Robert was constantly glued to his phone during dinner, and when they did talk, it felt like he was already mentally elsewhere. Emily felt the growing distance, but couldn't pinpoint the cause. She was too busy managing their home, too busy keeping everything perfect. Then, one fateful evening at their favorite restaurant, Giovanni's, Robert dropped a bombshell. After 20 years of marriage, he said 3 words that would forever change their lives. "I need space." Emily froze, her heart sinking into her stomach. She had expected something, maybe a conversation about how they were drifting apart, but not this. Robert, without a hint of remorse or emotion, looked down at his water glass as he spoke. His gaze didn't meet hers. "I've changed, we've changed. I think we want different things now," he said with an air of finality. Emily's heart shattered. 2 decades of love and commitment reduced to a cold, calculated statement over a plate of chicken parmesan. She opened her mouth, but words failed her. It was as if the woman who had built this life, the woman who had sacrificed her dreams to support him, had suddenly disappeared in Robert's eyes. Emily had given so much of herself to their marriage, but Robert, it seemed, had already checked out. As he slid a business card across the table and spoke of divorce lawyers, Emily felt like everything she had worked for had crumbled in an instant. She walked out of Giovanni's, her dignity intact, but her heart in pieces. In the weeks following Robert's announcement, Emily's world felt like it was falling apart. She couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that after all these years, Robert had decided to leave her. But as time passed, what Emily didn't know was that Robert had already been living a double life. His demand for a divorce wasn't just about needing space. It was about the affair he had been having with his secretary, Jessica. It all started with the small signs Emily had been ignoring for months. Robert's sudden obsession with his appearance, new suits, expensive cologne, and a gym membership he actually used. Emily told herself it was just a phase, a midlife crisis, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Then the late-night phone calls, the strange silences, and the lipstick mark on his collar. None of it made sense. But Emily, ever the dutiful wife, had pushed it all aside. She had to be strong. She had to focus on keeping their life intact, especially now with her health diagnosis looming over her. A few weeks before Robert dropped the divorce bombshell, Emily had received some devastating news from her doctor: stage 2 breast cancer. The diagnosis hit hard. The timing couldn't have been worse, and Emily, despite needing her husband's support, had to deal with it all on her own. She had planned to tell Robert about the diagnosis that evening, but as always, he was late. He texted her saying he was working late, and that was the 3rd time that week he had done so. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling the cancer she hadn't yet confronted, while wondering when Robert had begun to pull away. That night, Emily sat alone in their kitchen, staring at the marble countertops they had chosen together for their 10th anniversary renovation. When had their home become a showpiece rather than a sanctuary? When had Robert become a man she didn't recognize? She felt betrayed not just by his neglect, but by the subtle emotional abandonment that had been building for months. Then came the credit card statement. It was a casual glance, but Emily couldn't ignore the charges from jewelry stores she had never visited and restaurants that were too intimate for business meetings. That was when everything started to fall into place. The late-night phone calls, the sudden distance, the unexplained absences. They all pointed to one thing. Robert was having an affair. And it wasn't just an emotional distance, it was physical. Emily found herself looking back on their years together, wondering how she had missed it. How had she allowed herself to be so caught up in maintaining their perfect life that she had failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface? The signs had been clear, but Emily had been too consumed with her own illness, too consumed with holding their life together, to truly see the truth. The moment she knew for sure came when she saw the lipstick mark on Robert's collar. It wasn't hers. It was a vibrant red, a shade she had never worn. She confronted him later that evening, but Robert denied everything, insisting it was just a mistake. A mistake! That was the same excuse he gave when she asked if there was someone else. He hesitated, then admitted, "Jessica, my secretary, it just happened." The words hung in the air like a punch to the gut. 20 years of marriage erased in an instant by the words, "It just happened." The betrayal cut deeper than anything Emily could have imagined. But what hurt more was that Robert seemed completely unfazed. He slid the business card across the table, telling her his lawyer would be in touch. The divorce papers were already prepared. As he continued speaking, Emily could hear the distance in his voice, the finality in his words. He was done. But Emily, although broken, was not defeated. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just signed the divorce papers with a calm resolve, walking out of the restaurant with her dignity intact, but her heart shattered. Little did Robert know the real fight had just begun. After the divorce papers were signed, Emily's life seemed to spiral even further. She had to face her diagnosis alone, with Robert's betrayal weighing heavily on her heart. But the true twist of her story was still yet to come. Just when she thought the worst was behind her, Emily received a phone call from George Mitchell, her father-in-law. George had always been a father figure to her ever since her own father passed away when she was in college. He had been a steady presence in her life, offering quiet support and practical advice. Their weekly lunches together were one of the few constants in her life, and she had always appreciated his wisdom. However, during one of their lunches, George dropped a bombshell that would change everything. "Emily, I need to tell you something important," he said, his voice softer than usual. "After my wife passed, I made changes to my will. I added a clause, a moral clause, if you will." Emily was taken aback, unsure of what he was talking about. "What do you mean, a moral clause?" she asked, trying to make sense of the cryptic words. George looked at her with a mixture of sadness and regret in his eyes. "The clause states that Robert would forfeit his inheritance if he ever divorced you without clear evidence of your infidelity. The divorce had to be initiated by you or by him, but only with proof of misconduct on your part. I couldn't stand to see him take you for granted any longer." Emily sat frozen, her mind racing. She had always known George was a kind man, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Robert had never bothered to read the will, too focused on his own ambition and career. In fact, he had no idea that this clause existed. Emily could feel a shift inside her. The anger and betrayal she had been carrying now had something to fuel it: justice. George's revelation didn't just give her the strength to confront Robert, but it gave her a powerful tool to turn the tables. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She had the power to make Robert pay for what he had done. George continued, "I've seen how he's treated you, and I didn't want you to be left without protection if he decided to walk away. I know you've been through a lot, but I wanted to make sure that if he ever tried to break your heart, he wouldn't be able to walk away with everything." Emily was stunned. She had never expected something like this from George. He had always been supportive, but this was more than she could have imagined. The clarity she felt in that moment was almost overwhelming. Robert had miscalculated. He thought he could discard her, and he thought he could walk away with everything he wanted. But now, thanks to George, Emily had the means to take everything back. Her heart still heavy with the betrayal, Emily walked away from that lunch feeling a quiet sense of empowerment. She had the power to stop Robert from destroying her, and that power came from something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. She took a few days to process everything: her cancer diagnosis, her divorce, and now the power that had been placed in her hands. But in those quiet moments, she began to realize that this wasn't just about Robert. It was about reclaiming her life. It was about standing up for herself. And for the first time in years, Emily saw a future that was no longer dictated by Robert's actions. With renewed strength, Emily started taking control of her life. She scheduled surgery for her breast cancer and began radiation treatments. She started reuniting with friends and family who had been sidelined during her marriage. She even called her old financial advisor to secure her future. Robert had tried to erase her, but she was starting to rebuild herself, piece by piece. And then the engagement announcement came. Emily's heart sank as she saw the Instagram post: Robert and Jessica at an exclusive restaurant, announcing their engagement just weeks after their divorce was finalized. The caption read, "So excited to start this new chapter with my love." The speed of it, the shamelessness of it, stung more than Emily had expected. But the real blow came when she noticed the ring Jessica was wearing. It looked eerily similar to the one Robert had dismissed as outdated years ago. The same ring that had been passed down through Emily's family, a piece of jewelry that held sentimental value to her. The engagement party was set for 3 weeks from that day. It was to be held at Lakeview Cottage, the same place Robert had proposed to Emily 21 years ago. Emily couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of fate. It was the same cottage that George's will had tied to Robert's inheritance. Robert's attempt to rebuild his life with Jessica at that very spot felt like a slap in the face. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Emily knew she had one chance to make this right. The plan was set. Robert thought he had everything in the bag, but Emily had the upper hand now. She had the moral clause, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The moment of confrontation was coming, and this time Emily would have the final word. With the revelation of George's will and her newfound resolve, Emily found herself in a strange space. Despite the turmoil surrounding her, she began to rebuild herself, physically, emotionally, and financially. She focused on her health, making sure her breast cancer treatment was on track. The chemotherapy and radiation drained her energy, but each day brought her closer to recovery. More importantly, it gave her time to think, reflect, and make plans. Emily realized that in the midst of all the chaos, she had neglected herself. She had spent years catering to Robert's needs, smoothing over his shortcomings, and suppressing her own desires. Now, she was learning how to care for herself, and it was empowering. For the first time in years, Emily was prioritizing her happiness. She started to look at the world with a new perspective, a fresh lens. One of the first things Emily did was to reclaim her maiden name, Emily Jenkins. It had a ring to it, a sense of who she truly was before she was defined by her marriage. At the courthouse, she filled out the paperwork with a quiet sense of defiance. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, handed back her form and gave her a smile. "Welcome back to yourself, Miss Jenkins." That moment felt like a quiet victory. She wasn't just shedding Robert's last name, she was shedding the person she had become in her marriage. As Emily continued her recovery, she reconnected with friends she had lost touch with over the years. Some had reached out to her during her illness, but Emily had been too focused on her marriage and her role as a wife to truly appreciate the support they offered. Now, she was opening her heart again. She met up with old friends, went out for coffee with colleagues she had once been close to, and even took a trip to the coast with her sister Claire. It was during these moments of connection that Emily rediscovered herself, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. But as much as Emily focused on healing and rebuilding, she couldn't ignore the fact that Robert was moving forward with his life as if nothing had happened. He was planning his engagement party with Jessica at Lakeview Cottage, the place where he had proposed to Emily all those years ago. It was a gut punch for Emily. That cottage held so many memories, both beautiful and painful. The thought that Robert was trying to start anew there in the very place that was once meant to symbolize their love was almost too much to bear. As the date for the engagement party approached, Emily knew she had to act. She couldn't let Robert get away with this. He had walked away from their marriage, and now he was flaunting his new life. He thought he had won, but Emily had something he didn't know about: George's will and the clause that would ruin Robert's perfect illusion. The final confrontation was on the horizon. Emily started to prepare herself for the moment that would change everything. She didn't want to be reckless, though. She needed to be strategic. Timing would be everything. The engagement party was the perfect opportunity. It was a public event, and Robert would never see her coming. Emily planned to walk into that party, calm and composed, and deliver the news that would destroy Robert's carefully crafted new life. She arranged for a lawyer to meet with her before the event, making sure everything was in place. She also made sure to get all the necessary documentation in order, including the copy of George's will. She was meticulous in her preparations. Emily knew that Robert was underestimating her, and that was exactly what she needed. She would let him think that he had won, all the while preparing to take back everything he had tried to take from her. Emily's resolve was clear. The moment she stepped foot into that engagement party, it would be the moment she reclaimed her life and her dignity. The storm was about to hit, and Robert would have no idea what was coming. The calm before the storm was the final step in Emily's transformation. The day of Robert and Jessica's engagement party arrived, and Emily could feel the tension in the air. She had carefully planned every detail, every step, and now it was time to execute her plan. She dressed with purpose, selecting a sharp but elegant outfit that commanded respect. She wasn't going to let this party become an easy victory for Robert. This was her moment, and she was ready to make sure everyone knew it. The Lakeview Cottage, the very place Robert had proposed to her 21 years ago, was the perfect setting for this confrontation. It was ironic, really. Robert thought he could start fresh here with Jessica, but he had no idea that the history of this place was about to come back to haunt him. Emily had once dreamed of returning to the cottage with Robert, to reminisce about their love, but now it had become a battleground. It would be here that Robert's perfect new life would crumble. As Emily arrived at the cottage, she noticed the extravagant decorations, the perfect setup for the celebration of Robert and Jessica's engagement. The guests were mingling, laughing, and enjoying themselves, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Emily walked in with her head held high, her heart pounding in her chest. She scanned the room and found Robert and Jessica standing by the bar, smiling and chatting with their friends. Robert looked exactly the same, only more polished, more confident, as though nothing had ever happened between them. Emily felt a surge of anger, but controlled it. She wasn't here to lash out. She was here to deliver justice. Approaching the couple, Emily calmly introduced herself to Jessica, who seemed taken aback by Emily's presence. Jessica didn't know about the clause in George's will, and she certainly didn't know that Emily was about to shatter everything she thought she had won. "Congratulations on the engagement," Emily said with a calm smile, her voice steady. Jessica returned the smile, but Emily could see the unease in her eyes. Robert, on the other hand, looked surprised but quickly masked his expression, trying to maintain his composure. Emily could tell he was already wondering what she was doing there. With deliberate movements, Emily reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope, the manila envelope containing the copy of George's will. She handed it to Robert, her gaze unwavering. "I think you need to read this," she said coolly. Robert took the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. He didn't open it right away, clearly confused, but as soon as he did, his face went pale. He scanned the document quickly, his eyes widening as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice shaking. This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real, Robert," Emily said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet power. "Your father foresaw this exact situation. The clause in his will states that if you divorce me without proof of my infidelity, you lose everything. Your inheritance, the family estate, Lakeview Cottage, all of it. It's all tied to this place, and now it belongs to me." The room seemed to fall silent, the hum of conversations dying down as people began to notice the tension between Emily and Robert. Jessica, caught off guard, looked from Emily to Robert, confusion written all over her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Robert, still holding the will, looked from the paper to Emily, his mind clearly racing. His facade of confidence began to crack, and for the first time, Emily saw fear in his eyes. You're bluffing," Robert muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. This can't be true." Emily took a step forward, her voice low but firm. "You never bothered to read your father's will, did you? All of this house, your inheritance, everything is tied to me. And now, because you couldn't honor your marriage vows, you've lost it all." The realization hit Robert hard. He had been so sure that his new life with Jessica was the future he deserved, but now it was slipping through his fingers. His arrogance, his disregard for Emily and her years of loyalty had blinded him to the consequences of his actions. Emily didn't need to say anything more. The look on Robert's face was enough. His world had come crashing down, and the people in the room began to murmur, the truth spreading like wildfire. As Emily turned to leave, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had done what she needed to do. She had taken back control of her life, and Robert's carefully constructed new world had crumbled in an instant. The power had shifted, and for the first time in years, Emily felt free. Walking away from the engagement party, Emily knew that this moment, this confrontation, was just the beginning. She wasn't just reclaiming her inheritance, she was reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. The man who had once promised to love and cherish her had failed to honor those vows, but Emily had found the strength to rise above it all. In that moment, as she walked out of Lakeview Cottage for the last time, Emily knew one thing for certain. Her story was not over. She had just begun to write the next chapter of her life. Emily's journey from heartbreak to empowerment is a testament to the strength that lies within each of us, even when we feel completely shattered. Robert's betrayal, his neglect, and his arrogance had all been tools in his quest to build a new life, leaving Emily in the rubble. But instead of succumbing to the pain, Emily used it as fuel to reclaim what was rightfully hers, her dignity, her freedom, and her sense of self-worth. What started as a crushing divorce and a devastating cancer diagnosis turned into a battle for justice. Emily didn't just get back at Robert for his betrayal, she took back control of her life. The moral clause in George's will was more than just a piece of legal text. It was her ticket to reclaiming the power that had been taken from her. Robert thought he had it all, but he was blindsided by the very man he had taken for granted, his father. The lesson here is not just about revenge, it's about resilience. Life can throw us curveballs, and people we love can betray us, but our worth is not defined by their actions. Like Emily, we all have the power to rebuild, to rise above the hardships, and to reclaim what is ours. So if you've ever found yourself in a toxic relationship or faced betrayal, remember this: your story is not over. The power to take back control is within you, and sometimes justice comes when we least expect it. If Emily's story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with more powerful stories of resilience. Remember, you are never alone in your journey, and there's always a way forward, even when it feels like everything is falling apart.